So today we will be finishing off that lining on the inside of our zipper and attaching that to that zipper seam allowance area. And then below where the zipper stops, we will finish off the rest of the lining seam on the inside of our center back dress. And then we will put on our hook and eye at the very top of our zipper. So let's go ahead and switch over and get started. Okay, so over here I've got my completed dress. You should have both armholes completed. I've just got one completed because I was saving time during lecture, but both of those should be totally done. And then when we flip over to the back, we've got our lining layer sitting there on the inside, and this opening at the zipper where the lining and the shell are still separate is where we're going to be closing it today. So I'm going to take this lining out. So I'm going to pull it out so that it's separate from my dress. And then all the way, so this is my neckline, top of my zipper. So I pulled it all the way out. And now we're going to let this zipper tape stick off the edge. So this is exactly what it looked like when we attached that facing at the neckline. We let that zipper tape stick off the edge rather than being folded back, which is ultimately where it will end up when we're done. But right at that neckline, what I'm going to do is bring this facing and lining layer back down so that it is right sides together with my zipper area, and that zipper should sit right in between those two layers. And we're going to pin those together all the way down to the bottom of the zipper area. So I'm going to start up here at the top. I'm just going to do one pin at the top, and then the reference points that we have on this seam is our waistband area. So right here at the waistband area, the seams on the lining should match up with the seams on the shell. So let that seam allowance stick off the edge, match up your raw edges. Those seams should sit one right on top of the other. On both of those, the top and the bottom of the waistband area. I'm going to put one here in between. And then I'm going to pin this top area and we'll go move down below the waistband in a minute. So what we're going to do in a second is we're going to sew along this seam allowance area, and we're going to stitch that facing and lining layer down to the shell. Okay, so there's my neckline down to my waistband. Now I'm going to continue. I'm going to go ahead and turn the rest of my dress inside out so that I can get to the bottom of this zipper tape area. So I'm going to put my hand on the inside and just flip that bottom of the skirt inside out. And that will reveal the rest of my zipper tape area. I'm going to unzip my zipper all the way. And then we're going to continue pinning down, and where we want to stop is where the bottom of that zipper tape starts to split. So you have these plastic teeth, and then you have at the bottom of your teeth, instead of having like a metal little stop, normally we're used to seeing that metal clamp that stops the bottom of our zipper. For invisible zippers, typically those teeth are just melted together. So you should have a little area right there at the bottom where your teeth are melted together. And then you have this part at the bottom where it splits, and you can have those two sides separate from each other. So right where those zipper teeth are melted is where we're going to stop before it splits. So I'm going to pin all the way down to that point. Okay, so that point on mine is right here, right at the top of my double notch. I'm going to pin all the way down to that point, and I'm going to mark it with some sort of marking tool. I'm going to use my purple evaporating pen, and that right where those pieces of zipper tape split is right where I want to mark it on the blue on my lining, so that I can see from the outside where I'm going to stop, because your lining is going to cover that up, so you won't be able to see it as you're stitching. So I've just marked it so I know exactly where to stop my stitching. Okay, and then the rest of that below that area, we're just going to leave free for now. So let's head over, and I'll talk about the seam allowance width on this one once I get to the other camera. Okay, so we're going to do this with our zipper foot so that we can get close to those teeth. So I'm going to show you a portion of this. Oops. One of my pins fell out, sorry. Let me just repin that. Okay, so this is my little waistband area. And if I unpin that, you'll see underneath there, we have those zipper teeth. We want to stitch this lining close to those zipper teeth, but not quite as close as we did the shell. So the shell, we got as close as possible to those teeth without actually stitching on them. That was a full 1/2 inch seam allowance. For our lining, we don't want to get it that close to our teeth, because then we run the risk of our lining getting caught in our zipper as we zip it up and down. So if you've ever had that happen where you have a zipper on a garment, you go to zip it up and the fabric gets caught in the zipper. That's what we're trying to avoid. So instead of stitching this at a full 1/2 inch seam allowance like we did the shell, we're only going to stitch it at 3/8. So what I've done with my foot, if your foot moves at all, you can move your foot to the point where the edge of it is at that 3/8 inch marking on your machine. And if that, if your foot does not move, so that's not an option for you, another alternative is putting a piece of tape on your machine. So if you zoom in here, what I could do is put a piece of tape right here, just clear tape. And what that would do is allow me to draw, because I can't really draw on this plastic unless I'm using a Sharpie or something. But what I can do is put a piece of tape down and then measure over from my needle 3/8 inch. And then with my ruler, I can mark that 3/8 inch and give myself a little guide. So whatever works for you, if your machine already has a 3/8 inch guide on it, you can use that. You can move your foot to where the edge is at that marking, or you can mark it yourself with the tape on your machine. So mine, my foot moves, so I just moved it to where the edge of my foot is at that 3/8 inch marking. And for this side of the zipper, I'm going to go ahead and work my way from the bottom up, just so my pins are sitting over on the right and they're a little bit easier to pull out. So right here is my purple marking. I'm going to start right there and work my way up. So you're going to have quite a bit of fabric hanging off the edge of your machine as you do this. So you may need to use your hand in the front of the machine and in the back of the machine to help it keep from pulling over to the left, because right now all of the weight of the fabric wants to make it pull over. I'm going to put my needle down first, start right at that 3/8 inch at that purple marking. And then I'm just going to work my way up to the top. So hand in the front, hand in the back to keep it where it needs to be. And then you can see I've got my zipper foot on. This is my zipper pull right here. This little bulky spot is the pull of my zipper. So I'm just working my way around that. before you go over those seam allowances, you want to make sure that they stay busted open on top and bottom. Stuck with that little hump. There we go. Kind of get it over that seam. And so I'm just making sure as I go that my edges are staying even, and I'm checking on the bottom with my fingers to make sure that I'm not accidentally passing anything I shouldn't. Okay, and I work my way all the way up to that neckline. There we go. Okay, so now let's head back, and you can see here a little bit better on the backhand side, the difference between those two seams. So that bottom one was where we originally stitched on the zipper, and this second one is where I just now stitched on the lining. So there should be about 1/8 of an inch gap between those two. That way the lining sits a little bit further away from the teeth. Okay, so let's head back over to our ironing board and we'll get this turned right side out. Okay, so I'm going to trim off any threads that I have hanging out. And then I need to miter this corner. So this corner right here has a lot of bulk before we turn it right side out. So I'm going to miter off this corner, and I'm going to do it at a pretty steep angle. So instead of just doing a 45-degree angle, I did it a lot steeper so that I'm trimming off more going down that zipper. Okay, and then I'm going to turn that right side out. So I'm going to go down to the bottom where the end of the zipper is. Let me trim off this little thread. So down here at the bottom where the end of the zipper is, I'm going to stick my hand up in between those layers. I can run my hand along that zipper seam, and I should be able to feel the teeth the entire time. So run my hand all the way up to that corner, and then turn it right side out and pull it out between those two layers. So now you should be able to see from the outside, you've got that zipper sticking, just the teeth sticking off the edge. And then from the inside, we'll press this in a minute, but from the inside, your facing and your lining should sit a little bit further away from the teeth than the shell does. Okay, so we're gonna do the same thing to the other side before we press these. So coming to my other side, this one is fully open up to the neckline. Let that seam allowance stick off the edge, and then fold it right on that neckline so that your facing is now right sides together with your shell. Here we go. So I'm gonna start pinning from the top, and then I'm going to jump down to my waistband area because that's the reference point that we have that needs to match up. Your dress will kind of get tucked in between, so it'll be a little bit like a burrito on this one. So you can see how my dress is right there and my sides are coming together around that. Okay, so here's one waistband seam getting matched together. And then my other waistband seam. If you have a lot of raveling, so I have these kind of hairs coming off, you can trim those off. But one thing that's important, you might be able to see here where the edge of my fabric has raveled down. So I've got the solid edge, and then I've got these hairs sticking off, maybe 1/8 of an inch of hair sticking off where it's raveled down 1/8 of an inch. As I'm matching things up, if your fabric has raveled a little bit, make sure that you're using the tip of those hairs, because that's the original cut edge of your fabric. You don't want to shrink your fabric by using that new solid edge. So if you have any fraying, make sure that you're using those hairs as part of your seam allowance, and that the very edge of those hairs is what you're matching up to, not the new edge, because that new edge will shrink the size of your garment. Okay, seams, bottom of the waistband seam. Put a pin right in between those two, and then I'll do the top and then come back for below the waistband. So again, I've got these hairs, kind of the long ones that are sticking off, I can kind of trim, but I want to keep the ones that are sticking out, keep those, because we need to use those as our actual raw edge, our original cut edge of the fabric. Okay, so now the area below the waistband, again, I'm just going to continue matching up these raw edges until I get down to where those zipper teeth end. Okay, so again, mine is hitting right where my double notch begins. I'm going to mark that with my purple marker so I know exactly where to stop. Okay, let's go ahead and go stitch that on. Okay, this time I'm going to start from my neckline and work my way down. Again, just so my pins are sitting over on the right. So you can start on whichever, you can start from the bottom and work your way up, or from the top and work your way down, whatever is more comfortable for you. So line up the edge with that 3/8 inch marking. May have to help it get over this initial hump, because that neckline is pretty bulky. There we go. We're just working our way down to the bottom of that zipper tape. So you may be able to see a little better here where I was talking about having those frayed hairs. I'm still using the edge of those hairs as the edge of my fabric rather than the new solid edge. Got another little bulky spot here, so I'm just helping it over. There we go. Going very slow. This is my metal pole right here, so I'm just going slow. And you may have to do a little bit less of a seam allowance to get around that pole without hitting it. But then we can come back over to our 3/8 once we get past it. Okay, and then just work your way down to that marking, and then we'll back stitch. Okay, and again, from the other side, you should be able to see that difference between the two stitch lines. Okay, head back to our ironing board again. Okay, over here, I'm going to miter that corner again. And I'll do it at that steeper angle so I can take a little bit more out. If you need to do the top too, you can, to get that as trimmed down as possible. Okay, and then I'm gonna stick my hand up in there. So again, this is the bottom of my zipper. Follow those zipper teeth up to the corner and then flip that corner inside or right side out. And now for both sides, I need to form that corner fully with my point turner. So I'm going to stick that up in there. And just push out that corner so that it's a 90-degree angle. And then you can also kind of wiggle it out as well. Okay, so that's one side. Let me do the same to my other side. Okay. Now we need to press both of those areas. So from the inside of the garment, so I'm looking at the lining area, everything is turned right side out. So I should be looking at the right side of the fabric on both sides. All I'm going to do is kind of pull that lining away from the teeth so that we can press right on that seam line. Again, we want that lining a little bit away from our teeth so it doesn't get stuck. So push that lining away so you get all the way down to the seam line that you stitched, and then press it nice and flat. Okay, so this is what my pressed lining looks like. You can see the teeth. That stitch line that's in between is where I attached the zipper to the shell, and then my lining sitting further to the inside. Got this little tail I need to cut off. Okay. Press that other side as well, and then we will do the seam that sits below the zipper area for your lining. Okay. Now I'm going to look at my dress. So I've got everything, it's all right sides out, but I'm looking at the inside of my dress. So if that makes sense, I'm not looking at the seam allowance area right now. I'm just looking at the outside of my lining. So we need to now attach the lining to it, these two sides to each other below that zipper area. So I'm going to see if I can get all the way down to the bottom. So I'm going to take these two corners at the hem. I'm going to pull them up away from that shell. Got plenty of lint rolling I need to do, but pull them up away from that shell so that they're a little bit more free. And you're going to turn them right sides together. So they're laying like this, pick them up and turn them right sides together. And then I'm going to start working my way up from the hem up to this zipper area here. So right sides together here. There's a little 1/2 inch notch at that hem for you to match up. And then after that 1/2 inch notch, there really isn't anything to match up until you get all the way to the top or to the zipper. I'm just taking off these long hairs of raveled fabric just to clean it up a little bit. And again, if your fabric has raveled at all, make sure you're using the very cut edge to match it together. Okay, so I'm working my way up to this zipper. Okay, so I've worked my way all the way up to that zipper tape. The zipper tape is right here, the very bottom. This is my shell fabric. This is my lining fabric. So we're working our way up to where those two are connected to each other. And just like we did when we were putting our invisible zipper in, and then we had to finish that seam below the zipper, this is going to be very similar, where when we get close to this zipper area, we need to make sure to try and connect to that stitch right here where we attached that lining to the zipper just a minute ago. Okay, so I'm going to start from the hem and work my way up. And then when I get close to this area, I'm going to get as close as I can to the end of that stitch and try to connect to it. Okay, let's go stitch this. And this one will be at a full 1/2 inch because that seam allowance down center back is that 1/2 inch and we don't have the zipper area to avoid. So I'm going to switch my foot to the other side so that it's further away from where my zipper will be when I get up to that conjunction at the top. So starting at the hem, again, the gravity of your garment is going to want to pull it off your machine. So you have to kind of lift your garment up on the table. Just repinning this. There we go. Okay, so starting at that corner, I'm going to line up the raw edge of my fabric with the 1/2 inch marking on my machine. Right there. And then just work my way up to, from the hem up to the top of that seam. With lining, remember it also helps to keep it taut. So I keep my hand in front and back to help keep it taut so it doesn't slip around as much. Okay, I'm getting close to this intersection. So right now my zipper is kind of off to the left here. I'm going to get it to where it's straight in line with the foot so that my foot can slide right past it. So now I've straightened it out going this way. Get all of my seam allowances nice and flat. Now I'm going to try and connect to this little back stitch right here. There we go. So that's as close as I'm going to get. There we go. So you can see there's like maybe an 1/8 of an inch gap between those two at max. Okay, now let's head back to our ironing board and we'll press this seam. Okay, so coming back over here, and we're gonna have to bust open that seam that's sitting below our zipper area. So I'm gonna trim threads first, and then we wanna snip through both of those seam allowances right below where that zipper tape is. I'm gonna snip through both of them to release this bottom area so that I can bust it open. So you can see where I cut through both of those down to my stitch line, but not through it. And that will allow me, I'm gonna get my lining sticking down by itself. Here we go. So this is just my lining skirt. And we're gonna go ahead and bust open this seam and press it flat. Okay, so now when I turn everything right side out, I'm gonna look at the inside of the dress so you can see how that lining finishes up. Here we go. So on the inside of the dress, that lining should be attached to either side of your zipper, and then it's going to transition into a standard seam below that. Okay. So zipper and transitions into a standard seam. Okay, so now the last thing we're going to do today is talk about putting on our hook and eye. I'm going to zip up my zipper in the back. There we go. I'm going to unzip it just a little bit so I have the top of that neckline free. These need to be repressed a little bit because they got wrinkly, these little corners. Okay, and now we're going to talk about placement here, and then I'm going to switch to my other camera to refresh y'all on the type of stitch that you need to attach your hook and eye. So let me get a little bit closer to show you placement. Okay, here's the top of my neckline. Your neckline should be nice and even at the top. One should not be taller than the other. And then for placement, if I'm looking at the inside of my garment like this, my hook is going to get placed on this corner, and I'm going to put some pins in there to hold it down. And then I'll move my hands for y'all to see. There we go. So hook is going to get placed right on that corner. The little metal loops will touch the fabric, but the rest of the hook should stick off the edge of your fabric. The bend of the hook is right here, and it should kind of go flush with the edge of your teeth. And then the opening of the hook is facing up. And then I've got my eye. In my case, it's more like a little bar. This is the one that I had available to me. So let me pin this one as well. And then I'll get my hands out of the way to show you. Things are so tiny, they like to hop around. Okay, just there. So my little bar, or if yours has the metal loop will stick off to the right-hand side. But these two tiny loops that you stitch on should be touching your fabric. The metal loop, the bigger one that actually hooks onto the hook, should be sticking off to the right, just like this hook is on the other side. So it sticks off towards the teeth. So that's where you're going to put them, on the very inside of your dress. Are there any questions about placement before I start talking about stitching them on? No. Okay, so I'm going to scoot over to my other camera so I can zoom in a little bit, and then I'll refresh that stitch that we used for this one. Okay, so my metal hook, see if I can hold it in place. Like I said, they like to hop around. I'm going to stitch through both of those little metal holes. Need to get a hand needle, and we're going to stitch in place first. So I'm going to let that go, and just right where I want that first hole to go, we're going to stitch in place to secure the end of our thread. And that takes the place of a knot. All the way out. Okay, so stitch in place probably 4 or 5 times to make sure that that's not going to pull out. And then we're going to place those holes to where our hook, you can see my hook is sticking off this side. And the opening to the hook is facing up. The reason that we do a hook and eye at the very top of an invisible zipper is because invisible zippers tend to travel down because the body is pulling each side of the garment apart. And so as it pulls apart and your body just moves around and shifts, the zipper pull will just kind of start to travel down throughout the day. But if the hook and eye is at the top, that keeps the tension from pulling those two pieces apart, and it prevents your zipper pull from traveling down throughout the day. Okay, so we always need a hook and eye at the top of an invisible zipper, no matter what type of garment you're doing it on. So the type of stitch that we're using here is called the buttonhole stitch, and we did this last semester with our hook and eye. So if you need a refresher on this, even more than what I'm doing now, you can go back and watch that video from last semester. It is posted on Blackboard. So what I did was I went into the fabric outside the metal loop, came up through the metal loop, and then before I pull it tight, I need to go through my thread. And then I can pull it tight. And now every time go out of the loop and into the fabric, come up through that metal loop, and then through your thread before you pull it tight. Okay. And you're going to do about 10 of those on each side, on each little metal hole. Wrap it on my pin. There we go. Okay, so 10 up top, and then go down to this bottom hole, another 10 there, and then same on the eye for the other side. You're going to do 10 on each hole of the eye.